Thank you very much for joining us. I think everybody here knows Martin. We got a brief, very brief introduction before you joined the call. So I'm gonna dive straight into a question.
Okay, great.
And one of the questions that was submitted before the conference was maybe an easy one. Why did break and continue not get included in the original Scala? And the questioner has also commented they like it so much. Break and continue.
Okay, so I mean there were a number of imperative constructs that didn't make it, like the old style, the C style 4 didn't make it either. So I guess it was felt that since Scala is foremost a functional language, we didn't really want to sort of adopt all the sort of excesses of imperative programming, and I guess break and continue is sort of even more imperative than the other imperatives because it's really sort of like go-tos in disguise. So we thought that wouldn't be worthwhile to add that to the language. That you should express your algorithm rather functionally and not with break and continue. Later on, we had essentially a way to do it with exceptions in the library.
Okay, thank you. And there's sort of a follow-up question, which is from a different questioner, but they've asked, why are there so many new keywords in Dotty? And why are annotations underused? What helps you decide between making a new keyword and using an annotation?
I haven't actually counted how many new keywords does Dotty have. I'm not sure. But I want to say this, so a lot of them are actually soft keywords. So we started to have keywords that essentially only mean something in a specific position. Scala didn't have that before, but now it will have that. So most of them actually are not something that requires you to rewrite your code because they would still be legal as an identifier. Why not annotations? I think annotations are overused. Annotations are essentially sort of this sort of, I don't know, a way to invent new languages on top of old ones. And you can do everything with an annotation, which is precisely the problem. So essentially, you can make languages be very confusing by adding lots and lots and lots of annotations. It's way too easy to invent a new one. So I think a good discipline is to say an annotation should not affect the typing of a program. So it could affect like the interop or some other aspects, but for me the line is where it affects the typing of a program. I would be very much against putting that in an annotation. One could go further and say annotations shouldn't affect actually the core semantics of a program, but we have already violated that. For instance, volatile is an annotation, and that definitely affects the semantics of a program, but it doesn't affect the typing of a program.
Could they reasonably affect whether the program compiles or doesn't compile?
Yeah, you could say that. Yeah. So essentially, your program should still compile if you drop all annotations.
Okay, I think it's time we ask the audience for some questions. Does anybody have anything they would like to ask Martin? Question at the front. If you shout it out, I will try to repeat it. Oh no, there's even a microphone.
Okay, so I'm Guy.
So just hold the microphone a little bit closer.
Hello, Martin. I'm that guy that came to Scala from Kotlin, not vice versa. For me personally, Kotlin looks like stolen language, but it's my personal opinion. And every time when we host Kotlin conferences on our company, I hear from Kotlin guys that Kotlin is the future, Scala is dying, key players are abandoning Scala, such as Twitter, Wix. Maybe you can say something about new Scala and new future of the Scala, because I'm really relying on you.
If you say that, then I would say, well, that's just the difference between Scala and Kotlin. Kotlin is a corporate language, and it seems to have a very aggressive corporate marketing department that essentially they know what FUD means and they know how to spread it. And I don't really appreciate that. Whereas Scala is really basically an open source language. We don't really have evangelists on staff that essentially promote theories like that. We have some data. We have seen essentially from all the downloads, compiler uses, and things like that. The most accurate data we have is that Scala use is currently growing at about 20% per year. So it's definitely not dying. If you look at all other indicators, then I think it still shows that it's very, very strong. I believe it will get a big boost when we go to Scala 3, because that will be a language that is in all ways superior to old Scala and also Kotlin as well. Okay.
There was a question that someone asked about Kotlin. Maybe it was similar to yours. Can I just ask the audience, how many people here have tried Kotlin? How many people like Kotlin more than Scala? So nobody has put their hand up. So that sounds like an entirely fair and balanced outcome.
Of a selection bias.
Yeah. It's nothing Kotlin wouldn't do.
No. But I mean, listen, Kotlin again. I think well, there's a saying that says imitation is the best form of flattery. So I'm not at all. So if Kotlin becomes a really strong language, I would really welcome that because I mean, Kotlin, as we all know, has taken a lot of the ideas of Scala, basically most of them, with the exception of I can only see two big ones: higher kind of types and implicits. And I believe there are essentially efforts underway to add one or the other as well to Kotlin. So that would sort of make it complete. I think Kotlin is overall has more accidental features than Scala. Scala is a more orthogonal language, a smaller language than Kotlin is, and at the same time a more powerful language because it has implicits and higher kinds. But anyway, I mean, if Kotlin drags Java programmers 3/4 of the way to Scala, then that's a good thing. So I don't see that at all as a competition.
So maybe we could have some Java developers first moving to Kotlin and then moving on to Scala.
Exactly. Why not?
There was a question over there. I'm going to come to you in a moment because somebody else has asked a question beforehand about type-level programming capabilities in Dotty, which is probably an area that Kotlin is weaker in. I would say significantly weaker in. The question is, currently match types are limited. For example, they don't support recursive definitions, and rewrite functions are also in development. Can you explain your vision about these features and type-level programming in Dotty in general?
Match types definitely support recursive definitions. So that must have been a fairly old snapshot that the person who asked got away. No, they can definitely support recursive definitions. So I think match types are essentially the type-level backbone as far as types go. And
could you just explain very briefly to the people who don't know how match types would be used?
Okay, so a match type is essentially you have a match on a type, and a match on a type is again a type. So you can say some type match, and then you have cases, and each case is another type, and each a case gets taken if the scrutiny type is a subtype of the pattern type. So that way you can essentially select one of a set of alternatives depending on your scrutiny type. And they definitely can be recursive, which means you can use them to do interesting things that have been done with implicit so far. So the poster child of that is H lists. H lists that have been done with implicits and shapeless and other libraries now are actually the standard tuple type in Scala 3. So if you write a tuple 1, 2, 3, then yes, it's an H list. And the thing that makes it work is all with match types. So all the operations on them, like you can concatenate two tuples with precise types, you can select an element, and so on. All these operations are essentially expressed in terms of these match types. And since tuples can be arbitrarily long, yes, of course, you need recursion for that.
And they'll be fast.
And they'll be hopefully fast, yes. So far, we haven't seen a performance bottleneck, but we will see once programs really scale up.
Great. There was a question over there. Do you have the mic? Great, go ahead.
Thank you, Martin, for the best language I ever used in my life. and for still contributing it and working on it. So my question is about Dotty. Maybe where can we expect this released? And I saw only one feature considered, but not in progress or completed, that effects in Dotty. Do you consider integrating with CAS effects or Zio or something contributing by itself? And so kind of how effects would be implemented in Dotty? Thanks.
Thanks for the question. So it's a matter of timing. So we are fairly close to feature freeze for Scala 3. And for that release, we have essentially restricted ourselves to say we want to put everything in there that is a clear simplification or a restriction, an essential restriction where we say, well, things have been abused before, we want to put in a restriction to essentially avoid abuses in the future. And the motivation for that is to say, well, Scala 3 is a big jump from Scala 2. There will be quite a few things that changed. So in the end, all the books, tutorials, and things like that, if they're not super basic, they will have to be rewritten because there are now, in many cases, better ways to do things than in previously. For instance, many simple class hierarchies can be expressed with enums, and enums haven't existed in Scala. So even beginners' books will want to be rewritten because we want to tell people about these enums, which are often a much simpler way to express the same things with classes, just to mention one example. So that means that essentially everything that goes into an intro, all the essentially simplifications and essential restrictions should be in Scala 3, because Scala 3 is sort of the moment when the books will be rewritten. Everything that essentially is more advanced, either experimental or gives you more power, could go in later versions. And we have already a lot of things to do for Scala 3.0. So basically now the default is it will go in later versions. And effects are definitely on that in that set to say, well, we're very interested in effects, and we think we have a way that's promising that we want to explore, but it won't come in Scala 3. It will come in Scala, I don't know, 3.5 or 4 or whatever.
And I think the question also asked, when can we expect Dotty to be released?
Yes. So we have so the time plan is to go into feature freeze this year. Hopefully summer this year. They're still on the level of meta programming and type level programming. There's some things still in flux, which we have to work out. And if they take longer, they take longer. But the rest of the language is fairly much fixed by now. And then we want to give ourselves basically about 1 year for stabilization. So that means essentially working on the implementation, working on error messages, working on porting libraries, working on specification documentation, and so on. So for that so that means the release will be in 2020. About when is not quite clear yet. So the optimistically thing would be again summer 2020, but it might slip a little bit. We'll see.
Okay, thank you. The question in the middle here. We're just going to wait for the microphone to arrive.
Mm-hmm. But just one more remark to that. So feature freeze means that we will have essentially fairly stable developer previews from this summer on. So if you want to sort of already get prepared for it and try it out and maybe port your library or try it out in an applications, then from basically this summer on, you will know that we won't change the language under your feet. It's just that the ecosystem needs some time to migrate. So if you, let's say, depend on a lot of other libraries, then give it a year, and hopefully they will be there in a year.
Okay, go ahead with the question.
Hi, Martin. Is it possible to add a type inference for local or inner functions, so you do not have to write types for arguments of a function and return types, at least for inner and local functions? Is it possible to make it into Dotty, or at least have some sort of type holes in Dotty? Thank you.
Yeah, there was a discussion whether that's a good thing or not. It would be fairly simple to do. The SIP committee wasn't convinced that it's a good thing. And we decided then in the end, well, it's one of the things that could be deferred, because I guess if you talk to a beginner, then for at least for new people and maybe for everyone, it's actually better discipline to write out the parameter types. Yes, it's a little bit of more writing, but it's also clearer. So are there situations where it's actually better to drop them? Maybe, maybe not. We need more time to come to a decision. It would be very easy to do, but it's not quite clear yet whether it's worthwhile doing, and the members of the SIP committee don't quite agree on that. I'm more on the side, why not? But like I said, we have to all agree for a feature to be accepted.
So it's certainly not completely ruled out.
It's not completely ruled out, yeah. But again, it won't come in 3.0.
Okay, so one follow-up.
Small one. Could you please hide it behind the flag or something? if someone wants...
the SIP committee will decide details like that.
Just a suggestion. Thank you.
And a question in yellow.
Hi, Martin. Going back to our comparison to Kotlin, what's your opinion about coroutines and whether there are plans to have something like this in Scala? Thank you. Yeah,
coroutines are really nice, and I really think we should do that. It's definitely something where I would encourage people to just get together and do something. There is actually a very nice way to do coroutines in Scala, but I'm not sure how up to date it is. It's called Scala Coroutines by Alex Prokopek. He did a really nice implementation of these coroutines, and maybe we should just adopt them. But essentially, me personally, I'm currently really focused on the language proper, and coroutines as they are implemented in Scala. Coroutines seem to be sort of a mixture between runtime and library, say. So they need some runtime support and otherwise library support. But I'm definitely in favor of doing something like that, because I think that essentially having a nice way to express asynchronous computations is very important, and it avoids a lot of the messes with having to push that all in futures or something like that.
Okay. There's a slightly mysterious question that was sent in before, asking Martin, does the phrase stable equilibrium have any significant meaning to you? And if so, what is it? Stable equilibrium.
Stable equilibrium. That could be a number of things.
Yes, I think you have to read between the lines. Is the person who asked this question in the audience? Marco, would you like to elaborate?
Okay.
Can we get the microphone over here?
Hi, Martin. Thanks for your work. I want to ask you a question. Will ever be true dependent types in Scala?
Oh, so I had intended for Marco to elaborate on his stable equilibrium question. Can we do that first, and then we'll go back to your question?
Okay.
Sorry.
I've heard you used the words stable equilibrium.
Marco, closer to your mouth.
I've heard you used the words stable equilibrium in more than one occasion, and sometimes also it feeds back from the audience when they are able to ask you questions. In that sense, I was interested whether the phrase stable equilibrium means anything to you at all.
Well, I'm actually quite surprised that I should have said that. So I'm not sure in what context I said it. Like I said, it could mean a number of things, but nothing particular comes to mind now.
Okay, I said it was a mysterious question. Can we go to the person who asked the question I wasn't expecting, please? Just three rows back. Thank you. Sorry to make you ask the question again.
I'm asking about dependent types in Scala. Will ever they be in Dotty or maybe next releases? Or
so
not
you mean
any?
full dependent type, not path dependent type, what we have now. So Dotty he goes a little bit further than current Scala in the sense that we have dependent function types. so that means we can lift essentially methods that depend on a parameter type, we can lift them to function types. So that brings you a bit further to essentially full dependent types. Now, of course, full dependent types, it's not a single destination. It's sort of a very broad field. There are many, many ways to have dependent, essentially richer dependent types. And it's definitely sort of on the roadmap to investigate these things. I should say a lot of that, I think, at the current time is still research. So that means there's no really concrete time plan and no promises are made, but it's definitely something that people are looking into. Also, people in my group are looking into how one could get essentially more richer dependent type systems in the language. I should say both dependent types and refinement types are really interesting. So refinement types are essentially types that you can add, you can attach predicates to types, conditions to types, sort of like contracts, but resolved at compile time and not at runtime. So both of these are quite interesting, and both of these are actually interconnected.
Okay, but, thanks. Sorry.
Scala 3.
Thanks, Martin. Can someone tell me how much longer we have? Just so I can time this. Ruslan, do you know? 10 minutes? About 10 minutes. Okay. Go ahead with the next question, please.
Hello, Martin. I'm Yuri, and my question about future of SBT in context of Dotty. I'm using Gradle for build Scala applications because it's faster and simple in many cases. What about SBT future?
Well, it's difficult. It's not really for me to say. There are a number of build tools. SBT is one of them. It's sort of the most widely used one, I think. I believe that we should keep an open mind and maybe not push a specific build tool. So if Gradle is faster, that's great, and we should. In fact, there are efforts by the Scala Center to support Gradle better. So to essentially do incremental compilation for Gradle and these sort of things, and also Maven. So I think we should be very open-minded. And for instance, a lot of enterprises use Bazel, which is also a very good build tool. Mill is a very nice alternative to SBT. I would say for the moment, let's just see what develops, and then maybe something completely out of left field like Fury will come and take the world, and then everybody will build from source. Who knows? I would just say keep an open mind.
Thanks, Martin. I appreciate it. There is a talk later on Bazel, I think, and I'm giving a talk on Fury. So there are talks on build tools at this conference, so you can come along to those. Yeah, question back.
Hi, Martin. My name is Vladimir. At the beginning, you said that overuse of annotation is a bad practice. That's why you have a lot of keywords in new Scala. What about metaprogramming? Overuse of metaprogramming is also a bad practice, or not?
Yeah, I think in most cases, I would say yes. It's always the question is use the simplest tool that does the job, and I have the impression metaprogramming is often used when there would be simpler tools. So I would say, well, maybe sometimes you have to resort to it, but I have the impression that sort of metaprogramming is a bit in the same camp as implicit conversions that you say seems to be handy, but most of the usages are actually abuses, and you should have done something else. So that's sort of my completely unqualified opinion. I can't back it up. It's just a gut feeling. Yes, I would say we should strive to have less magic in metaprogramming and essentially more consistency in the language, because otherwise we risk falling prone to what people sometimes call the list curse, that essentially everybody does their own language in the dialect because essentially there are all these great toolboxes and it's so malleable, and then nobody can talk to each other. So that's.
Thank you for equilibrium in your opinion.
Okay. Let me ask another question from someone who submitted beforehand. This one's maybe a little bit different. Someone asks, do you listen to music when you code? And if so, what do you listen to, if you don't mind sharing?
I don't listen to music when I code. I would break my concentration. I'm not.
Okay. This one's looking a little bit further into the future. What will be your next step after Dotty?
I'll be busy a long time with this because essentially now that now we're going to feature free, so we know what it is. Then we have a year or so to actually deliver on it. And during that year and later on, I have to redo all my MOOCs because the language has changed, and rewrite the book or write another book, and essentially do a lot more in terms of teaching people about that. So that will keep me busy for a while. And then, of course, we want to look at also the other exciting things that might be down the road. And the one that sort of is lined up really next to look into seriously is effects. But like I said, that will be after 3.
And will we get a Scala 3 language spec?
Well, that would also be the hope for this stabilization year, that at the end of that year we should have a spec.
Okay. Any more questions from the audience? There's one at the back.
Yeah. Hi. I guess that all Scala lovers are using Monad heavily. And my question is, are there any plans to improve for comprehension, or at least to make it closer to, for example, Haskell's do notation?
Do you have any particular suggestions for how for comprehensions might be improved?
For example, make underscores optional in case of if we are not interested in the Monad result.
Yeah. I mean, the SIP process is open. Everybody can make a proposal, and I mean, people have to work on a spec and an implementation and these things. So definitely, we definitely are very open to that. But again, essentially, the time plan is quite rigid here. So I think extended for comprehensions is definitely something that will not simplify the language. So it's not so the acid test is really. Does this new feature now give me something that would make it easier to explain to a novice what Scala is, or is it additional functionality? If it's additional functionality, it will come in 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, but not in 3.0. And for comprehensions is definitely one of these things. So we're not under time pressure to add them now.
All right, thanks, Martin. We probably have just a couple of minutes left. I think I'll go for one more question that maybe has a deep technical answer. Martin, what do you think about type class coherency? Should all type classes be coherent, or should we have the possibility of having incoherent type classes?
Yeah, but we had thought about these things a lot, and in the end, the answer, I believe, is firmly no. We do not want type class coherency. We have now in the new language a very nice scheme to do local disambiguation, which means that you're no longer stuck in these sort of diamonds where you have a monad and an applicative, and now the map is ambiguous and there's nothing you can do about it. So there is something you can do about it now, because essentially you can just write a nested definition which acts as a tiebreaker. I believe coherence is clearly anti-modular. It talks about essentially a single instance for the whole program. So as soon as you put the whole program in your mouth, you are anti-modular. It's not a modular way to treat things. In a modular way to treat things, there is no program. There are just components that can be integrated in larger components. So that's sort of the meta thing. And the other thing is very practical, that I believe that, well, yes, Haskell has a culture. We can avoid that with essentially lots of new types. So basically, whenever we want to change functionality for a type, we can't do that. So we invent a new type. And then you have deriving VR and very complicated things to sort of get as much as possible operations on this type without having too much boilerplate. And it's certainly a local optimum that way. But I believe it's fundamentally, at least for Scala, it's the wrong thing, because again, I believe it's anti-modular. You should be able to disassociate the type with the operations on that type. And the fact that Haskell doesn't do it is, well, because Haskell doesn't have a module system, so they're sort of they were forced to, or it was very natural for them to go into that direction. But we don't have to copy it.
All right, that's very clear. Any questions remaining from the audience? The microphone is roaming. One at the front here. I think this will be the last one. I think we probably need to wrap up after this. Go ahead.
Hello, Martin. It is common that when people work on a project a lot of time, so usually people getting more calm or something like this. So I'm wondering, where do you take the energy from?
That's a great question to finish on. I'm actually having lots of fun doing what I do. It's great. So I'm almost regretting it's sort of basically for a moment that we'll have to stop with thinking about features and how they act together and things like that, and writing the compilers for it. So I'm having a ball, and that gives me energy.
All right, I think that's a perfect response. Victor, you have.
Hello, Martin. Do you have any plans to visit Kyiv next year? Scala year.
We'll see.
We'll see. Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
My apologies to you for rushing you to get to the computer.
No, sorry. I could have been here earlier. I just didn't. We got it. The wires crossed. No problem.
Well, and also my apologies to the audience for keeping you waiting as well. It is my fault. So thank you very much. And would you all thank Martin again one last time?
Thank you.